I just wanted to say I read the book, The Hunger graphic novel.
Right.
Incredible, really unsettling, and I had some thoughts I wanted to get into before we get into it. Like, you are an artist of like multiple disciplines, like filmmaking, producing,
Right.
all that. What made you get into the graphic novel space? What made you want to get into this space of storytelling?
I mean, the honest answer is I was just Dagan Merrill, who's the editor-in-chief of Flap Press. He was also one of my teachers at the START program at USC, and he'd read some of my work before and just thought it would be something that could be really good for the graphic novel company they were starting. So they asked me to pitch an idea.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened.
Yeah.
So it was kind of not intentional initially, but I think obviously once I started to work on the project, it was really more about trying to think about and understand the format of graphic novels and the potential that they have that other mediums don't offer, and how like that could inform the nature of this particular story. So I sort of and you know, because I work in an interdisciplinary way, oftentimes I might make something in a format or a medium that I've never done something in before. So it sort of always starts with a first principles thinking, in a way of trying to find what's exciting for me inside of that format, and how can I bring something to it that's probably not being explored in other ways.
Yeah.
So that's convoluted way of answering your question.
No, I think that's great.
Yeah, but it was mostly, I think I was most inspired by manga and Japanese horror, and I felt like that was kind of a space that I could enter into from my perspective. So then I did a lot of manga reading, and then, you know, I started to write Hunger after that.
Nice. So the art is incredible. Joe Bocardo did it. How much did you have, like, I guess, dominion over, or did you just let him kind of take your words and go? I'm curious about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think from, you know, when you're a creator who's not an artist, it's almost a little bit like facilitating or directing the process. So it really, I think at my end, was about how to be really specific and precise in terms of the framework of the vision that I had in mind for the book, and how to maybe create like a set of limitations inside of which something interesting could occur. So at my end, I try to be as descriptive as possible, not just in the writing of the script, but we also I created a set of materials for Joe to have, where I created a beat sheet, but of images that showed how the book moves from a different visual and color language, because it sort of evolves.
Yeah.
And then the character of Isna also evolves along with it. So I sort of created a graph of these two things visually, and then created a bank of images. One of them was entirely archival, based off of the photographer that we use in the book. He was actually a famine photographer who had photographed people moments before their death. So there was a lot of archive information of that time. So I merged that with like artistic and stylistic references that I was using while writing the book. And then gave them to Joe, and Joe read through all of it. He only had like 2 questions to ask me. What were my intentions, and like how would I describe the book in like a couple of words, or the theme of it. And after that, he just kind of knew what was needed, and everything that he sent was mostly incredible and perfect. And we would just he would send pencils. I'd probably give a few thoughts. We'd do some very minor iterations, but mostly he was like an incredible collaborator, because he took what you offered and kind of made it his own, and brought its own vision and life to it. That was very much like authentic to the essence of it, but he was elevating it to a whole other level with his craft. So it was a beautiful collaboration, and we've never spoken.
Really?
It's all been over email.
Wow.
So it's like the most incredible collaboration of my life.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was like, I didn't think it was possible to do this without a conversation, but this is...
That's impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it's impressive on Joe's part, I would say, because,
it's a very talented artist, can just take a lot of direction, but like little, like push, so they can just get what they need done. It's wonderful.
And I think what was really beautiful about working with him was that, it's a very culturally specific book, and there's a lot of nuances of representation of the culture and also the character of Isna. So I thought maybe that would require a lot more dialogue to arrive at the right kind of representation of those things. But Joe already knew what to do and what not to do, and it was absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
So I think that was, to me, the most impressive part of the process with him.
That's cool. You mentioned archive, you used some of the archived real. How, that's got to be hard to... Was it hard to look through some of that history? Some of the photos were that were in the book were pretty dark, and so is it, when you have to sift through that kind of violent history, how do you kind of keep yourself from falling apart?
It was very difficult. Yeah, it was I mean, when I was writing the book, it was very, very hard to write the book. I mean, I was physically unwell for like stretches, and I had to stop writing because you have to really stay in that space. And I was for a long time, and I mean, reading, researching, and looking at these images, and they were absolutely horrifying. And then thinking about the people who've done it and trying to see how to humanize their story within hunger and what these relationships are. So it was a very, very challenging process. I think it was very similar to, I think, what's in the novel, like where the character feels this pain in her stomach that comes from it. And I think that was a very visceral experience I was having while writing the book. So it was sort of informing as well how this hunger was being presented in the process. But I mean, I think it was, like what I attempted to do with that, because also that's kind of was the intention with the book itself, that when you're speaking about things that are about colonization and extreme trauma, there is a tendency for it to be quite heavy-handed sometimes, and for it to be quite one-sided in a way, where it's quite black and white and there's a hero and a villain. And the experience, at least in India, of colonization was never... I mean, there are obviously very clear incidents of black and white, but the lived reality was very complicated. And a lot of the times, I think Indians themselves were responsible for their continued colonization, and it was a complicated dance, and it continues to this day, where I feel that there's almost this bonded love between the two parties, which is kind of forged in trauma. And it's a very codependent relationship, and we're still very much bound by that relationship in India at the moment. So I was interested in exploring what the dance of that is, because it's actually quite absurd, and it's quite ironic, and it's horrifying, but also really funny that we continue to go down that way. And it almost seems that the colonizers were very much in love with the culture that they wanted to extract, and then the colonized also kind of were in love with the colonizers and what they were offering them. So I thought that if we kind of stayed in this place where there was this desire for something that you wanted from the other that had been interrupted, which was causing this hatred in a way. But what if we allow that to kind of express itself inside the lens of this absurdist horror drama, so to speak, then it allows to transform the energy of the history and how hard it is, and I think it just allowed space for through Isna's journey to almost reshape or reclaim that narrative, and so I think it's a bit of that, and on a related note, it's also I was just really interested in how brown death is represented, and it was the famine photographs itself that we see very much the legacy of that in present day coverage of international news when they're covering global south or brown bodies. There's no sensitivity to how those bodies are displayed. And a lot of that was happening in 2021 when I was writing this book with the second wave of the COVID pandemic in India. That was quite horrible. And it was really being consumed in a very ghoulish way around the world, with the bodies and the fires and the carnage. And you never saw that in the representation of anything in the West, in terms of tragedies, and I was just sort of interested in looking at what the roots of this hunger for this kind of image was, which sort of took me back to this time in history in 1896. So I was really interested in exploring this idea of the spectacle of brown death, but to like reframe it through the lens of folklore and horror, where Isna and the Pisat sort of kind of reclaim how their death is seen in a way, and it kind of moves beyond that. So I don't know, that's a long way of answering your question.
No, and you answered like two other questions that I had, but no, I appreciate that. That's exactly what I was wanting. And you had said, before I get into the 1896, going into a book and flipping it open and seeing a Winston Churchill quote, heavy. Why did you go? I mean, he's a villain, so why did you use that quote over any other?
I mean, I think Winston Churchill has been with me for a while because he's celebrated so much as a hero, and he definitely caused one of the worst famines in India during World War II. I don't know if you know, but all of the grain that was being produced in India, he voluntarily he gave the orders that it should be taken away from the people that were starving and kept in storehouses in England, I think. I could be wrong in the exact facts, for potentially the troops. And it's said that most of it went to waste because they didn't actually need it, and that created one of the biggest famines in Bengal in, I think, around 1945, 43. And he continues to be celebrated as a hero because he rewrote history. And he made Hitler the villain and said that we are the defenders of human rights as the British, which I thought was ingenious. And everybody follows his playbook to a T. But all of the things that he was saying to me were just really interesting, or they always stick out to me as this kind of character that we think is a hero, but he's actually just a very complicated person. And I think this particular quote of him, where he says there are beastly people with a beastly religion, again, to me, it kind of brought me back to this idea of a bond of love, because I don't think you could hate a culture so much if you didn't actually love it, or you wanted some of it for yourself. So I thought that was just really inspiring as a quote to keep in mind when I was writing Hunger, because it uses a lot of mythology and folklore that's rooted in Hindu wisdom traditions, I'd say, more than the religious aspect of it. And that was the thing that the British hated quite a lot about the country, about how pluralistic the faith was, how people had different ways of practicing it, how everything was not sort of black and white. So to me, that quote kind of like represented the book, because it starts with kind of them trying to put the people in these, print images, very linear realities, and then Pisachin is now sort of rupture that reality into something that's really more of a indigenous faith, in a sense that's something more of an oral culture than a literal one.
Yeah.
So I just kept it in front of me while writing the book, so I thought I should keep it for whoever wants to contextualize it.
Respect that.
Yeah.
I think you raise a good point. It was kind of reverberated throughout the book, where it's like they mentioned that not my God is straight, but your God is like is beastly or darker and has like more animalistic. And I thought that was so interesting, because that is the way they see, brown people in India. And I thought the parallels of what you had mentioned, that you can hate something so much, but you still kind of love it. And I think that speaks a little bit to American black people and American colonization. And I think that's an interesting point. And when you're writing a character like Isna, writing about women of color, and there's like this fine line of sharing that story, but not over sexualizing because that often happens to women of color. And I love the way that it was written, where she was still taking her power back, even with all the discoveries she made conscious choices to I guess bond or fully give herself over to the Pistache. Where did you get to that point in writing that for her? Because sometimes I felt like a sacrifice, but it was for a greater good, and I was like, no, yes. It was just, I felt a lot of things about this.
You mean not sexualizing that relationship between her and the Pistache? Mm-hmm. Ah, interesting. I didn't think about that. I thought maybe you'd mention about her and Hoopa, which was also...
I will get to that.
I think I was, I'm very conscious of that, for sure. I think, to the point of like how Isna as a character was represented even in the art was really important to me, which I think Joe got perfectly.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately in comics, female characters are very, very sexualized in a very specific way. No. And I think even conceptually when I was writing it, I wanted to write it in a way that she's quite fluid, so there isn't a specific gender in terms of the representation. And obviously if you're a famine survivor, there's no way that you're, I think some people could, but there was no way that you could project that kind of reality onto the character. And then she becomes a mutant, and then kind of this formless, hybrid creature. So I think in just thinking about what transformation she has, I was making choices that would take us away from conventional representation, but really leaning into folkloric and mythological representations in India, where a lot of even like now when you look at the gods in the Hindu pantheon, they've over time become very sanitized in the way that they're shown, very sometimes very European looking, and they're and we've seen this evolution, and it speaks to very much this theme of colonization, but in just looking at the ancient images and paintings and drawings and even the sculptures, they're very animistic. They're they're very formless in a way, and it's like you're looking at something quite ancient and not an exact representation of the social world, but it's kind of a cosmic form of something. So I think I was just trying to see how we could remain in that space where it's a form that's constantly evolving, and it's kind of going back to these traditions of something that's quite ancient, and what does that look like? And I think with the Pistache specifically, To me, it was never that sort of a relationship because for me, the Pisach is really just energy, and it's reached such an ancient monster in a way, and it comes from in Indian folklore, monsters and gods and demons and humans all sort of live together. And just because you're a god doesn't mean you're a good person, and just because you're a monster doesn't mean you're evil. So it's the good and evil is separated from what your category is, in a sense. But it's really about just different species existing and different kind of realms of consciousness that you can become aware of. So for me, in a way, the book is kind of looking at this idea of a human's transformation in consciousness. So for me, her accepting the Pisach is her sort of moving beyond the reality that's been given to her and sort of being able to access a higher reality or dimension. And that is something that allows her to like move into another shape. So it was, the journey in that sense was almost a spiritual transformation. Which is why, for me, it was more about the intimacy of things. Like, how do you... because often the representation of anything sexual is not actually intimate.
Right.
It doesn't actually explore what is a deeper form of connection between two things. I was just always sort of trying to find what's a way of creating that in these characters. Yeah, I don't know if that answers.
No, that does.
Yeah.
With the photographer, with Hooper,
Hooper,
yeah. There was the way the story was woven with Isna and the other two, where the desires kind of crescendoed and build. That was obviously the heart and the meat of what was going on. I wasn't expecting the bond between Hooper and Isna, but how did you get to that place? Like, I'm very curious. I thought it was really well done, but I was also just like, whoa, that's not what I was expecting.
Oh, you were not? Okay, great. It was. How did it build? I mean, it was quite central to this idea, thematically of the book, of this bond of love between the oppressed and the oppressor, and how the two are kind of fused together as a result of that. And so, for me, dramaturgically, it was that Isna and Hooper were the two central characters in the depiction of that idea. And I mean, it was subtle, but I don't know if it's clear, but we tried to sort of show it because Hooper has these mutton chops and Isna has similar hair on her face. And it was almost just this idea that when they see each other for the first time, they recognize something of each other in the other person, even though they're like on the other side of the line. And that there's kind of a bond there that's almost instantaneous, also maybe ancient in some way, and that as kind of the story is progressing, it's also the Pisach that's controlling Hooper. So the Pisach is also creating space for Hooper to give in to that desire or the slightest sense of that feeling. And so the book is really kind of all moving to that moment where that can occur between these two people. And I think from Isna's point of view, it was more about, I think at the beginning we sort of see how she's enamored by this world. She's also been assimilated into it, and kind of they've all been trained into speaking the English language, and so there's a sense of like the Stockholm syndrome going on, and she's sort of really quite taken by this act of photography, and there's something quite beautiful. In a moment she kind of forgets where she comes from or what's happened to her, but the photography itself kind of brings that idea back. So that changes the nature of their power dynamic, but there's always this bond between them that they're trying to resolve in some way. So I don't know if that answers the question, but the idea was to sort of look at how that can be explored in the book.
Wonderful. I wanted to ask, about the. Hold on, I think we can. Okay, Sash, yes. Ooh, so there was a quote that said earlier. I think it was Isna's mom. In our family, monsters are things to be evoked, not feared. And we've mentioned that as monsters just living as a part of the reality and not good or evil. Just that's a separate thing. And at the end, when they form this monster god deity that kind of frees the people, people from the camps, and the vision of the British, just floating in the air. It was just also horrifically. It was beautifully horrific, and really almost cathartic too. The work isn't the work isn't done. I want to make sure this would end all of those who started this. How did you get? I want to. I kind of want to explore where you got in that process of is this kind of gone? No, she's a part of the Passage, but Hooper's still there. So I guess I kind of wanted you to talk to me a little bit about the ending a little bit. Just how that, what is that? I'm not asking the right way. I'm curious about your process in creating that ending, where she disappears into, or she becomes something bigger than herself.
Right.
And then it's not a monster, it is a monster, but they free the kid. I guess I just want to know a little bit more about your thoughts on that and how you wrote that.
On how it ends?
Yeah.
Or what form she takes towards the end.
Because I'm it's gorgeous, but I think I was just wanted to know understand it a little bit more.
Right. Why did she take that form?
Yeah. Why was that choice made? And I can understand why she wanted to, because she wants to end the occupation and the genocide that's essentially happening.
Right.
But why that choice? Why give into the Passage?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think. I think the story, in terms of story and character, what I was trying to create was that. So I'm. I don't know if this is too much information, more than anything else. But I'm half indigenous on my father's side.
Okay.
And I come from a small tribe in the Himalayas. And I've kind of recently reconnected with that part of my family and heritage. And it's a very... inside of the myth of that indigenous tribe, our particular village, we descend from demons. When a demon and a goddess consorted, and we're supposed to be the descendants of. So we're half demon, half gods. As a tribe. And I was just really captivated by this idea that you can descend from a monster, and that it's very similar to colonization, where you're asked to minimize this part of your identity because it's, this is relevant for modern India as well, because as indigenous communities in mainstream India, there's a similar kind of colonization where their culture is considered to be savage and not moral or pure enough as the rest of the country. So there's a lot of self-erasure in speaking about those traditions and heritages. So I was just sort of interested in this idea of a character that potentially comes from demons, and that she herself is a monster, and that she's been trained to believe that she needs to be good and submissive and pure, or a particular way to fit into society. But it's her denial of that very part of herself that's taking away her power. So what does it mean for this character to really arrive at a point where there's no other option but for her to give in to this rage of her ancestors, in a sense, So it was the sense that she kind of summons this, but it's her, in a way, coming of age in that sense, to a point where she says, I think I need to accept this part of myself, and it's very ugly and beastly, but that's still where her strength lies. So it's so that was kind of the sense of why she allows the pisage to come in, but I think it's almost that it's inevitable. It's always supposed to happen. It's just the moment when the rupture occurs for her to make that choice. And the particular form itself, I mean, that's a lot of it is again from folklore and mythological traditions where gods or demons have many different forms, and when they actually take on the form of killing, like when they get really rageful and they're going to destroy the earth or something, they have a completely different form that's quite horrifying and magnificent and hard for like normal humans to comprehend, and that's kind of what breaks them when they see something like that. And when that moment passes, they go back to the more acceptable form. So it was just this idea that there's this moment where she needs to destroy all of this, so that form will emerge, and then it kind of goes back. And it'll, whenever she hunts, that form will kind of come out again.
Gorgeous. The final form of that was probably one of the most beautiful things I've seen.
Oh, thank you.
It's beautiful. The moth, or it was gorgeous. So I think that was incredible. I think you've answered all. Wait, no, I have one more question for you, but to end on, what is next for you? Is Hunger staying a graphic novel, or do you want to take it into a different form? Because you're experienced in a lot of different ways of media. Do you want to take it into a different format, or are you moving on to another project after this?
I mean, I definitely want to make a film out of this. I think we'll have to figure out what that process is, because it'll be a very complicated film to make. And but I would love to see this in a live experience. And